One of the most common spots you are going to be in when you are playing No Limit Texas Hold'em is when you raise before the flop, the big blind calls, and then they check to you. A lot of people in this situation continuation bet every single time. And against weak, tight, passive, straightforward players, that can be an okay strategy. But as you're playing against better and better opponents, you simply must learn to continuation bet somewhere near the GTO frequency using roughly the GTO bet size. As you are more and more precise against players who you presume play well, that's going to result in you making more and more money. And that's exactly what we're going to be discussing today. Here we have the continuation betting flowchart, which you can find in the tournament or cash game masterclass on pokercoaching.com. And I'm going to go through the in position section today. So we are in position. Should we continuation bet often, like every time, some portion of the time, or somewhat rarely? And the answer is, it depends on how your range connects with the board. We're going to be looking at a wide range spot today where you raise from the button. If your range was much tighter from early position, the boards will interact differently with your range, but you can go through and use PeakGTO to explore those situations on your own. In general, you're going to want to bet very often when you have a lot of very strong hands in your range, when you have a large range advantage, such as on high card boards, because you are raising with a lot of strong high cards before the flop. Also, high pair boards like King XX, Queen XX, Jack XX, etc. These are going to be situations where you also continuation bet very, very frequently. Now, on boards where you do not have such a big advantage, or perhaps where your opponent just happens to have a lot of very strong hands, you're going to be betting less often, usually using a smaller size, but typically you're going to be betting less often, right? We're talking about frequency here. We're talking about sizing over here. So as the board is worse and worse for you in general, where your opponent just has more hands, you're going to be betting less often, which means you cannot continuation bet 100% of the time. You have to do some checking. And then as the board is especially bad for you, you have to check even more often. Now, when you raise from the button, there are going to be very few flops that are especially horrible for you, because even on the low card flops, you're going to have some straights, but we'll explore what would happen if you raised from early position instead. Next, sizing. You really want to be concerned with who has the nut advantage. Who has more super duper strong hands in their range? Say the flop comes ace, king, queen. As the pre-flop raiser, you have all the sets, two pairs, straights, etc. in your range. And that's the spot where you have a big nut advantage, which means you're going to be betting big most of the time. When you do not have the nut advantage, though, such as on, say, Jack 6-6, when you do bet, you're often going to bet tiny, because when you raise pre-flop, the big blind has a lot of random offsuit 6-6 hands in their range, whereas you as the pre-flop raiser do not. There's also this idea of range connectivity. How well does the opponent's range connect with the board? And an example of this would be, say it does come ace, king, queen. If your opponent has an ace or a king or a queen, or maybe a jack or a 10, they're not really trying to fold to a bet, right? So they have pretty good range connectivity, which means when you bet, you want to bet on the larger side. If they don't have so good range connectivity, such on, let's say, king 8-2, where as the pre-flop raiser, you have a big range and nut advantage, you're going to be betting frequently, but you want to consider how well does the opponent connect with the board? And on king 8-2, they're just going to have a lot of garbage, right? And as they have more and more total garbage in their range, you typically bet using a smaller size. So when you lack the nut advantage, you usually bet small. And when they just can't have that many good hands, you also tend to bet small. I've pulled up some spots in the PeakGTO library. Let's take a look at it. Here we raise the button. The big blind calls. The flop comes ace, king, queen. They're going to check the flop every time. And in the situation, we are betting every time with our entire range, mostly using a large size of something like 2/3 pot. Okay? We do give the solver the option to use a small bet size, and here it is choosing mostly big. And that's because we have a big range advantage, a big nut advantage, and the opponent's range is going to connect somewhat well with the board when they have something, like any pair. So that's the spot we're going to want to bet big basically every time. We can compare this to other similar flops. Say it's ace, queen, jack. If they check, we're going to see a very similar pattern, right? Say it comes king, queen, jack. It's going to be similar. We're going to check perhaps a tiny bit more often here, but similar pattern, right? We're betting frequently using the large size. High card flops like this result in the pre-flop raiser betting almost every time using a large size. Next, what about boards like 9, 8, 5. This is a board where we have a lot of hands that are almost always good, but they're also very vulnerable. And on top of that, the opponent's range is going to have some good hands as well, right? So when they check the flop, as they should do with their entire range, when we do bet, we bet using a somewhat large size in this situation when we decide to bet. But notice we are doing a whole lot of checking. And when you are betting with less than everything, you're going to first want to start betting with your best made hands that are almost always good, but vulnerable to being outdrawn, and then draws. And in position, you can bet with both high equity and low equity draws. So take a look. A lot of our nines are betting very, very frequently, right? Also, a lot of our draws, which would be flush draws and hands containing a 7 or a 6, are betting very often as well. Notice these are betting very often, right? And if we look for various flush draws, like let's say ace 2 of, like say queen 2 of hearts, it's actually not betting all that often because it doesn't want to get check raised, funny enough. So we're not actually betting our high equity draws that want to get check raised. We're betting draws that can bet and then continue. Very important point. When you are playing medium stacked, notice we are 50 big blinds deep here. Draws like ace 2 of hearts, while they're fine to bet, if your opponent's going to check raise you, you don't really want to be in that spot, so you opt to not bet them instead. Notice you'd rather bet just total garbage, like ace 2 of clubs and spades instead, because if you get check raised in, you can fold. And with a hand like queen jack of hearts, queen 10 of hearts, jack 10 of hearts, king 10 of hearts, king jack of hearts, etc., these are much more inclined to bet because they can just very easily call with the 2 overcards and the flush draw and the straight draws. Cool, right? Notice what's not betting. What's not betting are hands like an 8. Right? 8s are doing a whole lot of checking because these are hands that are medium strength and they want to conserve the size of the pot. They do not want to get check raised, so they don't bet, right? 5s, these hands also are betting very, very infrequently. So we're betting with our high equity draws that can continue easily against a raise, some low equity draws / trash like queen 2, jack 3, queen 3, etc., and random hands with outs like king 7, king 6, right? These are gut shots with an overcard, just total garbage like ace 2, ace 3, etc., etc., etc. Okay. The main point of this, though, is that we can't bet this board every time because we don't have a gigantic range advantage, but we do still want to bet using a somewhat large size because we have lots of high equity hands and draws. The opponent is also going to have a lot of hands that are similar. Now let's look at middle connected boards. Now we're going to start to see smaller sizings get mixed in. And when you see smaller sizes get mixed in like this, in GTO world, the solver is going to split it. But if you wanted to just use one bet size, like say you wanted to bet 40% pot on boards like this, I think that is usually going to be fine. Typically, when there are straights available, when you do bet, you're going to bet using a smaller size because you're just going to be betting into the nuts when your opponent has queen jack some portion of the time. Now, the hands that often use the bigger size are the hands that are almost always good but vulnerable, and hands that use a smaller size are usually the more, call them thin value hands, like we see queen 8 and jack 8 fitting into that situation, right? I recognize this spot is going to be somewhat difficult to play, especially if we are trying to play against the perfect GTO opponent, but these boards typically result in a decent amount of betting, but using a medium size, the middle connected boards like this. Now, let's go down to the very disconnected boards. This is where we have a big range advantage as the preflop raiser, but the opponent just can't really have anything, right? Going back to the flow chart, their range connectivity is very, very bad. They're just not going to have a whole lot of good hands. So in spots like this, when we do opt to bet, we're betting frequently using a small size, okay? And we can see how we would do it on other boards, like say it's queen 7, 3, probably going to use a similar strategy, right? Mostly small bets, very frequent. And as the board gets better and better for the opponent, meaning like say it's like 9, 4, 2, we have to do a little bit more checking. We don't get to bet quite as often, but still the small size is used. So uncoordinated boards like this, we bet very small when we do bet, but usually pretty often. Also, high card paired boards typically result in lots of small betting. Okay? So say Jack, Jack 3, lots of small betting, King, King 4, you're going to see probably every time, right? Say we have Ace, Ace 4, Ace, Ace 4, we're going to see every time, right? But then if you move the card down, such as on Jack 4, 4, now we're betting way less often. So why would that be? Well, now we just don't have nearly as big of a nut advantage. And when your opponent has lots of hands containing trips in them, you have to do a whole lot of checking. Okay? So on boards that are paired, when you bet, you're going to be betting far more often when you have lots of trips in your range compared to when your opponent has lots of trips in their range. Okay? One thing I did want to show you as well is if we did raise from, let's say, under the gun with a much tighter range, if we raise with a much tighter range under the gun and the big blind calls, and the flop comes 7, 6, 5, let's say, they're going to check every time. Now we actually don't bet very often at all. So why would we bet this flop far more often on the button compared to when we're under the gun? Well, the under the gun range, even though it has lots of overpairs in it, just has no real straights and two pairs. Whereas the opponent in the big blind with this range has all these combinations of two pairs, sets, and straights, right? So this is a spot where when they check, we actually have to bet very infrequently. And this is a spot a lot of people mess up. When they raise under the gun, with a very strong range, might I add, they think I have a big range advantage, so I should bet frequently. And that's a mistake. So always consider how your exact range lines up with the board. When you raise from the button, you always have a pretty wide range, so you get to bet pretty often. But from early position, that's not necessarily going to be the case. All right, I've loaded up the PeakGTO trainer. We're playing a tournament, 8-handed, with a 12.5% ante, which is roughly a big blind ante, 50 big blinds deep. We're starting before the flop, raise first in. We're on the button against the big blind. Let's select some hands that we're going to be dealt so we don't get dealt total trash. So we're going to be playing these for the most part. And here we are. Looks like we're slightly off the screen. Let me reposition it real quick. All right, Queen A suited, we raise the button. The big blind is going to 3-bet us some portion of the time, unfortunately, but they do not this time. Flop comes Queen 5-4. Interesting flop. Typically, I think this is going to be a spot where we're going to want to mix sizes, and top pair bad kicker often uses a small size when you are going to bet it, and I think we do probably want to bet it here. Maybe it's still a spot to go for the big size. I think we can go either way in reality. On very dynamic boards that have a flush and a straight available, you don't bet every time. But when you bet, you often use a bigger size. As a general rule. We can go through and explore this in just a second in the history. Let's go with the big bet, but I can be convinced small is better. And notice it is mixing. And when you see a mixed strategy, you should be fine if you're picking either one, right? And it's nice to see that I was even deliberating between the two. Turn 5 should be very good for the opponent. When they don't lead, that should weaken their range a lot. But I think we can probably just check this. 98% check, which is good to see. I know we didn't discuss turn and river strategies. We were mainly discussing pre-flop, and maybe we'll just skip through. On the river, we actually mix folds. I would not fold a full house unless the opponent is very, very weak and straightforward and will never bluff. Now, that said, they did have the nuts, so it's good to see that kind of thing, right? We will have a mastering the river strategy at some point, I'm sure. When your opponents use giant bets on the river, you got to fold a lot. All right, King 10-5. In the spot, we have the ace jack. I think... Oh man, we have a lot of draws that can bet, but this is another spot you have to be careful betting flush draws that don't want to get raised. I don't think we want to get raised on this one. I'm going to say check, but I could be convinced it's okay to bet using a big size as well. Let's err towards betting, but it might just be check. And it's actually the small bet. Okay, so we would have gotten this one slightly wrong. Ace 5 offsuit. We'll raise it up. And by the way, whenever you do use the trainer, you're going to get spots wrong. And the great thing about the trainer is you can train and work hard to improve your poker skills. That's exactly what we are going for. We kind of looked at a similar spot earlier. I think we do want to bet this one, probably using a smaller medium size with this kind of trashy hand that doesn't mind folding. I'm going to go with the bigger size, but it is mixing again, so that's fine and good and reasonable. Pocket sevens, we raise it up. And as you see, with the GTO trainer on PeakGTO.com, you can just go through spots over and over and over and over and over again. All right, here's a fun one. King, Jack, 10. Now, we actually had a similar spot pulled up here. On King, Jack, 10, notice we're going to do a lot of betting. Our hand in particular really doesn't want to bet. Very logically, we have a hand that's not great if we bet and get called. And as we see, sevens is checking a decent chunk of the time. However, in this situation, you have to ask, if I check it back with only perhaps 9s, 8s, 7s, and 6s, which is, notice, mostly what is checking in this tiny 4% range, a lot of players will logically put you on those hands and then bet you out of the pot on the turn in the river. So what I would recommend in this spot is to simply bet everything big. I know it feels a little bit dirty to bet the pocket sevens big, but that is what you should do with, look, basically your whole range, 90% of it. And for simplicity, for you, you can know on the high card, 3 high card boards like king, queen, jack, king, jack, 10, whatever, you can bet frequently using a big size, and that's like every time, right? And you're going to be okay. A6, raise it up. Notice, by the way, we just have like a small set of heuristics we're somewhat following, and we're not going to be perfect, but we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. All right. Here we have a middle disconnected board. I think we're going to mix checks for sure. The question is this hand bad enough to bet? And I think we probably do want to bet it. And I'm going to say use a big size, but I could be convinced small is better. All right, it is mixing again, so that's fine and reasonable. We'll play a few more and we will call it a day. But if you want to continue training, definitely check out PeakGTO.com. Here we get 3-bet. Let's just move to the next hand because we aren't discussing 3-bet pots today. But you can train any situation you want in the PeakGTO trainer as much as you want, and that's going to go a long way to helping you get really, 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 really good at poker. You want to make a point to train hard. You'll have an ELO rating that'll tell you if you're getting better and better at poker. And if you find spots where you struggle, practice them over and over and over. All right, ace 6-3, middle disconnected cardboard again. Oh man, I'm going to go with check on this one, but I could be convinced of other plays. Okay, 4% check. We should have gone for the small bet. So that is good to know. Let's actually take a look at this one in the trainer. Ace 7-6. This is apparently a spot to bet frequently. No, it's ace 7-6, not ace 7-5. And again, this is kind of a spot where we are betting very frequently, and I would have perhaps found some checks, but if you are checking the tiny sliver at the time it is with the underpairs, right? So we probably would run into the same problem we ran into on the king, queen, jack board. Turn 3, if we bet the flop, actually we checked through on the flop, didn't we? So we raise, they call, check, check. Probably supposed to just keep checking it down at this point. We'll move on to the next hand though, because again, we are not studying post-flop plays today. Queen 8 suited. We'll pack it up after this one. Ace, queen, 9. Wow. Flush draw board, big card board. I think we can go for the smaller medium bet here. You think either one's probably fine? Let's go with the medium one, but it is smaller medium mix. So that's fine and good. And that'll wrap it up for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you check out the poker coaching flowchart if you have not already. We'll make sure we put a link down below. And make sure you check out PeakGTO.com because look, I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. Everyone's not perfect, even in very common poker scenarios after the flop. Post-flop poker is difficult, but if you work hard and develop good, strong heuristics, you're going to make the first best decision or the second best decision almost every time. And if you do that, you're going to be way better than your opponents. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe button down below. Click the notification bell. Good luck in your games. Have fun. I'll talk to you next time.